Hello and welcome to a very special episode 91 of the Pos-cast with Rabbi Shmuel Posner, myself, Seth Hellman. Rabbi, how are we doing today?
We're good, fine. Baruch Hashem. Boston is still in a bit of a sleep, but we're waiting for after Shabbos for the onslaught of returning students. It will be great.
So, as I'm sure everyone has noticed if you're watching, but you might not have noticed if you're just listening, we do have a guest today. Shabbos Kestenbaum has taken the time to speak with us. If you don't know who Shabbos is, he has been all around the news in the Jewish world as far as the last, I guess, year and a half at this point, really. He is kind of the face of the lawsuit against Harvard, and the anti-Semitism going on there. He's spoken at the Republican National Convention, excuse me, and I've heard him speak in person recently at the Chabad in Manchester, which is how we connected and how we got him on. So Shabbos, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So how we like to start, or Rabbi, do you want to start off with the question?
I just like how you compacted his resume. He spoke at the RNC and Chabad of Manchester, New Hampshire. This is like
it's the same level. It's the same level. It's a house of the Rebbe, Rabbi.
I'm just pointing it out.
Go ahead, Rabbi.
Shabbos. First, what Shabbos is that your real name?
Yep, I was born on Shabbos, so my parents kind of figured why not.
So you're Ashkenaz. There's no turn. You're davening.
No, except when I go to Israel, then a lot of people, especially at Burger's Bar, will say Shabbat.
They'll call you Shabbat.
Yes.
Interesting. So, if you can just tell us a little bit about your 5 minutes resume of who you are and how you got, just how you grew up and all that kind of stuff, and then we can get into the subject on hand.
Sure. So I come from a first-generation American family. My parents moved here from the UK about 30 years ago, and I'm one of 7, which is fairly typical for an Orthodox family. We were raised with an appreciation and a sense of American patriotism, while also a steadfast commitment to Jewry. My dad actually was once affiliated with the Chabad movement, going to a lot of the Chabad yeshivas like Brunois. He very much saw himself as a chassid of the Rebbe, but we were raised in a modern Orthodox community here on the East Coast. And I was in Jewish day school my whole life. When I graduated high school, SIR High School in Riverdale, I went to Yeshivat Eshet Torah in Jerusalem for 2 years. I was studying ancient Jewish philosophy, Talmudic law, literally 50 feet away from the Western Wall, and being infused with a sense of religious fervence, a sense of spirituality, a sense of awakening. I very much wanted to tap into that long term. And so after 2 years at Aish, it kind of dawned on me that I wanted to continue to explore and study religion, but from a very different background, from a pluralistic, non-sectarian, academic perspective, which is something I had never done before and something most Orthodox Jews don't do. In hindsight, this was a silly idea. I should not have done this. But I felt that I was relatively young. I didn't have many responsibilities. So I kind of owed it to myself to study religion from a perspective that would otherwise be alien to me. And because it is a very niche degree, I always joke that the only thing you can do with a degree in religion is apply for unemployment benefits. I kind of figured that the only way I can leverage this, the only way it would make sense for me to study religion, is if I were to do it at a relatively top university. So in the American psyche, certainly in my personal imagination, there is no penultimate than Harvard University. So I applied to Harvard to study religion. Lo and behold, I got in. I actually found out I got in when I was in Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is maybe a story for another time. And I decided that I was going to do it. And I had sort of an inclination, certainly because people had told me when I was applying from the Orthodox community not to do so. The very few people who had gone had pretty negative experiences. So I did have an inclination that there was something muddying the waters, but I did not grasp to any meaningful degree the pervasive and systemic nature of anti-Semitism, anti-Israel bigotry, and political indoctrination that I would face relatively quickly. And that's sort of me in a nutshell. Oh, and I should also mention that I registered as a Democrat the day I turned 18. So I'm happy to compare my progressive credentials any day of the week. And my political evolution sort of mirrors a lot of the American Jewish community, in the sense that we were pretty proudly progressive and staunchly liberal. And come October 7th, those political alliances and affinities were greatly tested, and many of them were broken, myself included.
Yeah. Wow. Now, some Orthodox Jews figured it out before October 7th, but their affiliation. And the truth of the matter is, the Rebbe was not Democrat or Republican. He was an issue-oriented. That's the focus he gave us, issue-oriented. That's why Chabad Lubavitch in Washington goes from one administration to the other and just basically focusing on the issues, not affiliating themselves with the party line. But that's a separate issue. So you went to Harvard to study religion. So this anti-Semitism you're talking about, you felt it after October 7th? It wasn't like what year are you now? You're still in Harvard?
So I just finished Harvard, and no, the anti-Semitism was there well before October 7th. I mean, I always start the story roughly 100 years ago, when the president of Harvard University was a man by the name of Abbott Lowell, and President Lowell tries to institute a quota, a legalized metric of discrimination, by having a cap on how many Jews were admitted into the university. And to me, the legacy of the quota is its shocking relevance in the 21st century. At its peak, Harvard was 25% Jewish. Today, it's 4% Jewish. It's not because Jews got dumber over time. It's because there's been a deliberate and systemic campaign to crack down on the amount of Jews at Harvard University. In fact, as a percentage, there were more Jews at Harvard under the proposed quota system than there are today. That's a pretty scary indictment on the state of higher education in the United States. And in fact, I always say that I've proven myself to be someone who was speaking out against anti-Semitism before October 7th. I'm not making this up. You can Google my name with the words Aish, A-I-S-H, and I wrote an article called Anti-Semitism at Harvard, and I wrote it in October of 2022, saying that there were like these pervasive and systemic issues, and it's really weird that people aren't speaking out against it. And lo and behold, a year later, October 7th happens, and then it becomes undeniable and inescapable. But certainly these things were there for many, many years. In fact, I'll say this: my father has an auction house. He started the first auction house in America specializing in rare Judaica. And he has an auction coming up next week. And he comes home a few nights ago and he says,
yeah, that's called Kestenbaum.
Yes.
Ah, okay.
So he comes home a few nights ago and says, I have something to show you. And in his upcoming auction, he has a book. One of the first, I might get the exact facts wrong, so you'll have to excuse me, but one of the first, if not the first, Hebrew printed books in America, or Hebrew printed books at Harvard. Point being, why is this significant? Because this class that this book was part of was taught by the first Jewish professor at Harvard University. Now, why does that matter? Because the first Jewish professor at Harvard University was only allowed to teach at Harvard University if he converted to Christianity. His name was Judah Monis, and the condition of his professorship was that he would publicly convert. And this was in the 1720, I believe. To this day, Harvard has never apologized. They don't even acknowledge that this was something that was forced upon Jewish people. If you want to teach at Harvard University, you better make sure that you convert to Christianity. So again, this did not appear after October 7th. This was there really since its founding.
But it's interesting because the head of the Judaica program a few decades ago was Rabbi Twersky. So it wasn't like Judaism was being hidden or suppressed. I mean, in that way, he was like a Hasidic rabbi. He was like a Rebbe even.
And how shocked and disappointed would Rabbi Twersky be to see how mightily Harvard has fallen. I get asked, because I do speaking engagements full time, I get asked by alumni, this does not sound like the Harvard I know. And I say, yeah, it probably isn't the Harvard you know. I can't relate to what it was like 20, 30 years ago. I can relate to the experiences today, and I can also tap into the historic injustices. But the reality is Harvard has really, and this is not just true of Harvard, it's true of most Ivy League universities and most institutions of higher learning in the United States, in the last few years, really accelerated in the last decade or so. They have become incubators of this intellectual and moral rot. They have become incubators of political indoctrination. And yes, most obviously and blatantly, they become incubators of anti-Semitism.
Okay, so you have two things. You have historically it's there, but it didn't bother anybody for a couple hundred years, it would seem. If they have 25% Jews there, that shows that it wasn't blatant. So historically, that's interesting, but not really. But then you're saying it really came to the fore in the past decade, where it's really becoming. Where's it coming from? What's behind it?
Yeah, that's sort of the $1 million question, and I get asked that a lot, and I sort of say it's all of the above. So people will talk about foreign funding, people will talk about DEI, people will talk about radical professors, and there's no magic bullet because it's sort of a combination of all of these things. I always say that anti-Semitism is an amalgamation of greater societal ills, and to me, the greater societal ills at play here are the fact that racial identity, sexual orientation is triumphed above intellectual worth and academic discourse. So the fact that you have professors who incentivize people to degrade the United States of America, to degrade Western civilization, to degrade the Jewish state, the fact that you have anti-democratic, anti-Semitic, anti-Western countries like Qatar, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, they're funneling billions of dollars every single year into Ivy League universities. The fact that you have the American taxpayer that is funneling billions of dollars against their own will to these universities, they're sort of given a blank check to do what they would like. And to me, the most important point to make is if Harvard wanted to combat these issues, I don't just mean of anti-Semitism, but if they really wanted to create spaces of education once again, they would do it. I mean, there's literally nothing stopping them right now from telling these students who have followed Jews on their way to class during the encampments, who have vandalized American flags, who have called for intifadas. There's nothing stopping Harvard University right now from either disciplining the current students or making a very clear line in the sand saying these are not the types of students we are going to accept in the future. There's nothing stopping Harvard right now from saying Qatar and Russia and China and Saudi Arabia and the UAE, we don't want your money. We're not going to accept it, or we're going to rescind the money that we already received. Nothing is preventing them from doing any of those things right now. There's nothing preventing them from going to these woke professors in these classes that we've clearly identified are not just anti-Semitic, but are, as I said earlier, incubators of this groupthink, of this indoctrination. There's nothing preventing Harvard from cracking down on those professors and making sure that classrooms are not theaters for political narratives and political biases. But Harvard doesn't want to do it. And the evidence I have is they are not currently doing that. So it's a pretty damning indictment that it requires a lawsuit. It requires a presidential election. It requires congressional investigations and subpoenas. And even then, Harvard is fighting everyone tooth and nail because there's this inability and unwillingness to create the meaningful and systemic reforms that would really chart Harvard into a new path. So I always say this, and I know I give long answers, so I apologize, but I always say this. This is not just a Jewish issue. It's not an Israel issue. This is an issue that affects the core of Western civilization, the heart of our liberal democracy, the foundations of our liberal values. Because the unfortunate reality is Harvard purports to train the next generation of American leaders. And statistically speaking, they're kind of right, at least as of now. It is not an exaggeration to state, statistically speaking, I probably sat in a room with future congressman or senator or even president of the United States. And if these are America's future leaders, those who are taught and agree that the nails lodged in Jewish women by Hamas don't constitute rape, that there is no greater evil than the American capitalist system, then this is an issue that affects the American people, whether they realize it or not. And there needs to be fundamental reforms, not just for the sake of institutions of higher learning, but for the sake of the American people. And at the very least, those reforms, to me, they look like taxing university endowments, withholding federal funds, cracking down on DEI, deporting foreign students who violate American law. Only then, with the threat of discipline and punishment, will these institutions have a chance of salvaging what little remains of their intellectual worth and reputation.
So I'm a big proponent of like control what you can control, right? So obviously you're doing whatever you can to try to get Harvard to change, what's been going on and, what could go on in the future, particularly in the classroom. And so I know that I myself growing up, if I ran into something, that was an issue in the classroom, whether that was, if another student said something or if an event was scheduled on a holiday, and I went to the administration to try to get to move. And this is, I did this through the levels, whether high school, middle school, whatever. Like, it didn't matter how old I was willing to do this. And when you had come to Manchester after the fact, I was talking to some of the parents, and they were saying how, their kids are experiencing these issues, this anti-Semitism, in their schools. And, these are mostly high school kids, but, they're afraid to kind of do anything about it. So I was curious what your advice would be to students at any level of how to deal with, whether it's a teacher or professor or their fellow students, being anti-Semitic and standing up for themselves without, necessarily escalating or causing more problems for themselves.
Look, it's obviously easier said than done, this idea of standing up and fighting back. We all, in an ideological level, would like to do all of those things, but practically, when you're the only Jew in Manchester and you're in a school district that is vehemently opposed to your religious beliefs, it's intimidating, it's scary, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So I'll say this. When I first started I guess the term is to be an activist, which I don't think is entirely accurate, but when I started to respond to what was happening on campus, my reaction, or certainly not my immediate reaction, was great, let's file a lawsuit. My reaction was, how can we work with Harvard University to transform, to reform, to fix? How can we work within the framework, the existing structures? Because number one, that would be the easiest way of doing it. And number two, I didn't come with a sledgehammer thinking, well, we have to knock down all these walls. The more I was doing that, trying to work within the system, the more I realized nothing would be and nothing was getting done. Nothing was getting accomplished. So I only took this abrasive, confrontational approach, not because it was my first desire, not because I necessarily wanted or even currently want to do it, but simply because I found in my personal experience, nothing else was really working. And I cannot tell you how many times leaders, especially those in the Jewish nonprofit space, have told me three of my least favorite words, which is behind the scenes. Oh, we're working behind the scenes, so we're with you, but we just can't really tell you what we're doing because we're doing it behind the scenes. Because we haven't seen any progress. We haven't seen any results. So if they were to tell us we're working behind the scenes and then actually something came into fruition, then fine, I would have the humility to say, I recognize my own limitations. But to simply say we're working behind the scenes does not absolve you of your moral, ethical, and professional obligation to do the things that you purport to be doing. So I took this approach because I didn't see any other options. And I am hesitant to tell other people that should be the approach, because everyone is different. Everyone's circumstances are different. The school board or the school district of Manchester is probably very different from Harvard University, which is probably very different than the Ramapo East District School. So everyone is different. What I will say is, broadly speaking, on a hypothetical plane, you should not be denied your educational experience, your professional opportunities because of your religious or political beliefs. That is an anathema. That is an affront to our American system. That is an affront to our democracy. And if you are feeling discriminated against, if you are feeling that you are being sidelined or you are being attacked because of that religious or political expression, then something must be done. Do not accept it. Do not say this is the status quo and it is what it is, because those days are simply over. And that does not just mean discrimination against Jewish students. I always say our lawsuit against Harvard is a victory and a voice for anyone who's been on the receiving end of discrimination, bigotry, and hatred, whether you're black, white, Jewish, Muslim, a Democrat, Republican. And for the life of me, I can't understand why there are not more allies who are standing up saying that this fight against anti-Semitism is really a fight for, American democracy and our rule of law.
So I think, tailing off of what Seth asked, the question is, you have a student in a classroom in a university. So I agree with you. Working within the system works. I know at Berklee College of Music, at Boston University, the students actually approached the administration during the last year and this year. And I think it did help. I think they did get it, with this, having calm conversations with the administration about the particular protests and the way pro-Palestinians were disrupting school and things like that. Nothing aggressive or physical is happening. It's just, the disrespect for the rules of the school. I think that's what they did work with the Jewish students. I had meetings with the administration as well. So I can see that. But you're talking about a student sitting in a classroom and a teacher saying something like you're saying, that is off. He doesn't want to jeopardize his grade. He wants to get the grade and get out of the class. He's not going to start talking to, he's not going to open his mouth. He's just going to let it pass and like suffer through it and write the paper the way the professor wants to see it, and not challenge those issues. And one more thing, is it a university issue or is it a societal issue? The American culture, where are we holding now? I mean, it looks like that's the way the people want it. That's the way of thinking, that people are happy to have it. All the, the approach to life, the gender issues, all the social issues that we look at as Orthodox Jews. It's like, this is completely off and wrong. And like, what's wrong? It's an ill. So.
Yeah. So as I said earlier, I think contemporary American anti-Semitism is an amalgamation of a greater societal ill. As we all know the saying, Jews are the canary in the coal mines. And you can basically judge the progress of a society, especially in a Western country, based on how its Jews are being treated. I mean, this is just true historically speaking. The moment you see the blatant discriminatory acceptances against Jewish people, you realize that society, that culture, has very few legs to stand on. So no, I do not think that this spat of anti-Semitism is confined to a vacuum. I really don't. I think it is a sign of greater ills. What those ills are, I'm not a political scientist. I'm not an anthropologist. I will allow the experts in the room to opine on that. I have my own theories, but ultimately I don't know. Is it economic anxieties? Is it social frustrations? Is it disdain with the immigration system? But it's probably all of the above. I don't really know. But what I will say is it's not just an issue of anti-Semitism in a vacuum. But in terms of the core of your question, which is, what do you do about it? And how do you respond? Look, pre-October 7th, I mean, literally October 6th or 5th, I was a nerd writing mediocre research papers in the library. And I'm still a nerd. That hasn't changed. What has changed is I don't write as many research papers. And then I was sort of just thrust into this position. I didn't intend for it to happen. I did not conceive of it in my future. Even now, I don't even know what this space is. I say this space, in a very general, vague sense. But the fact that I have been given a very limited platform, it's a platform nonetheless, is a testament to the fact that you don't have to be particularly intelligent, articulate, brave, wise, because I'm certainly not. All you need to have is passion, and you need to have a real world experience. You need to say that I'm a 18-year-old at a high school. I'm a graduate student at a college. I'm a professional in some business setting, and say that I've been on the receiving end of this bigotry, and then just say it, talk about it, say that it is wrong. The first step, and perhaps the most fundamental and most important step, is acknowledging that there is a problem. I mean, I know I sound like an AA counselor at the moment, but it's kind of true. Admit that this is wrong. It sort of reminds me, and I guess this is a Chabad podcast, so for the first time I get to divulge into, Torah musings, so give me 30 seconds. If you look in the end of the book of Genesis, like Parshas Bereshis, not the Sefer, it says that humanity was evil, and God had created, God had regretted creating them. And then in the opening of the book of Noah, the terminology is different. Now it's humanity is corrupt. And now that humanity is corrupt, God decides, I'm going to have to destroy the world and start all over. Why is it when humanity is just evil, God doesn't say he's going to destroy them, but he regrets? But when humanity is corrupt, now God said there's no turning back. Because for humanity to be evil, there is a recognition that there is justice, there is goodness, there is a non-evil entity. But when a society is corrupt, they don't have that recognition anymore of what they're doing is wrong. And that is far worse, because a corrupt society cannot differentiate between the light and the dark, cannot differentiate between good or bad. And I fear that we as a society are slowly drifting away from evil and just, good or bad, to a society of total corruption, whereby people do not have that sense or those limitations of what is objective good, what is objective bad. And so to defeat anti-Semitism, to restore our institutions of higher learning, to restore the values of America as a idea, we need to start calling out evil. We need to start calling out badness. We need to start calling out anti-Semitism. And I fear that not enough people are doing that, standing up for basic good, standing up for basic justice. And it's hard for me to give general advice because everyone's situation is different. All I can say is we must internalize, recognize, and actualize that what is happening in this country and to our civilization is evil, it is wrong, and it is really, really bad.
See, I mean, the piece of advice I would give people, just particularly to the classroom, is just, when it comes to after education, in high school, maybe it's a bit bigger of a deal to have a good grade because then you're getting into college, right? But unless you plan on going to a school after that, your current grade doesn't matter that much. Most jobs are not caring what your GPA is, right? And so I guess that was kind of the attitude I had for the most part. It was, I don't care if I'm rubbing a professor the wrong way because my grade, I'm going to pass the class anyway, right? So my grade isn't that important. I mean, not to say that I wasn't trying in the classroom. I did pretty well, but I think there needs to be a certain level of lack of fear over your grade. At some point you need to realize you can do as well as you can in the classroom, and one bad grade's not going to tank it, but there are things more important than your GPA, and in the end, your GPA is not going to be that big of a deal.
Yeah, I mean, I always say I received the best education at Harvard, and it was not because of Harvard, and it was not because of the classes I took. It's simply because I got a real world education in life itself. And no class can prepare one for what so many students took on after October 7th. And I would very much agree that there needs to be a prioritization of values. My values are one that align with American democracy, that align with the Jewish people, and that align with Jewish values. And that is far more important to me than a test grade. That is far more important to me than classroom attendance. So did my grades suffer? Did I miss a lot of classes towards the end of my time at Harvard? Absolutely. Do I regret any of them? Absolutely not.
So you did graduate.
Yeah, I did finish.
So during the time that you were there, the past year, before you graduated, what was the and you're like you walk. Everybody knows who you are. Everybody in Harvard knows who you are. The professors, the students. How did that play out?
Well, I think I always wanted to make a name for myself. I just never really realized it would be this. I thought I'd invent something or, tell a really good joke, but whatever. So look, there's no other way to put it. It was incredibly awkward. It was difficult. I lost all of my non-Jewish friends. I lost a significant amount of my Jewish friends. It was lonely. It was isolating. It was frustrating. It was emotionally negative. It took a physical toll on me. I don't need pity. I don't need sympathy, but it was not a good year. And part of our lawsuit, which I encourage all of your listeners to read, just type in Kestenbaum v. Harvard, and it's publicly available. But part of our lawsuit really outlines the real harm that Harvard caused. As much as we talk about the triumphant spirit of the Jewish people and how we're going to counteract these institutions of higher learning, we also can't forget that there were real harm and real damages done to the plaintiffs, done to Jewish students, done to Harvard's own student body. And there needs to be serious repercussions and accountability. And I am not going anywhere unless that accountability and repercussions are divvied out. Whether that's a settlement, whether it's going to trial, I've been very clear from day one. I don't care how this is concluded. I care that it is concluded, though, with justice to Jewish students, with structural reforms, and a measure whereby this will never happen to any student ever again, regardless of their religious identity, their political beliefs, their sexual orientation, their race, their ethnicity. And the fact that Harvard has been unable to do any of those things clearly proves it is not worthy, not deserving of the billions it receives from the American people.
So there's a lawsuit. What's the parameters of the lawsuit?
So we allege, among other things, the crux of our argument is that Harvard has violated Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which is a provision that prohibits institutions, certainly one that receive federal funds, from discrimination. Jews are a protected class as part of the national origin clause of Title VI, and Harvard has an obligation to make sure that we are treated just the same as everyone else. And we have made it evident, we have made it obvious that Harvard has reneged on their federal obligations. They've reneged on their own school code of conduct. They have diminished our educational opportunities. And the fact of the matter is, our Judge Richard Stearns of the Federal District Court of Massachusetts, a fairly progressive guy, or at least he was. He volunteered for the George McGovern campaign. He was a Bill Clinton appointee. He ruled in July, saying in part, I quote, "The facts as pledged show Harvard failed its Jewish students. We are the first case in American history pertaining to the civil rights violations of Jewish students on a college campus to actually go to trial. It's never happened before. Harvard's double motion to dismiss were rejected, and we have standing. The judge clearly saw what we had been saying for more than a year. We are treated qualitatively different as a direct result of our religious identity. And I would not want to be Harvard University right now, because they are going to have to answer for every single thing in our case."
But there have been other universities that made these settlements and just like sort of skipped around it and moved on.
So I can't talk about the specific dealings, but what I will say is there is no current settlement, and we are headed to trial. If Harvard wants to create those structural reforms, if they want to do what they should have been doing irrespective of a lawsuit, then great. Let's do it right now. And if they are not willing to do that, then we will see them in court.
Wow.
So we've had a lot of, I guess, I don't want to call it negative. Like, it's not a lot of great stuff going on, but I figure, you did study chassidus a little bit, right? And this is a Chabad podcast. So I'm wondering if there's, Rabbi Posner might have a better way of framing the question, but I'm curious about your journey with chassidus, and if there's anything kind of within your studies that you are, particularly, proud of or interested in that you want to talk about.
Sure. So let me, 1 second. I don't know if you'll be able to see, but the background of my phone, the background of my phone is the grave of the Kutzker Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, which admittedly is a very odd thing to have as the background of your phone, but it has been the background of my phone for at least 6 years. He is someone that I have been enamored with ever since I first went to Poland when I was 18. I'm now 25. I've been back to Poland at least 30 times, always making sure to visit him and visiting his grave when I go. So externally, I'm certainly not a chassid. I am not the most religiously devout Jewish people out there. I'm not a very good role model. What I will say is the famous story that we all know, where a chassid went to the Rebbe and said, "I want to be a chassid. What do I need to do? What are the strimals I need to put on? What are the externalities I need to become accustomed with?" And the Rebbe, very matter of fact, said, "If you want to be a chassid of mine, it's very simple. You need to wake up each day and ask yourself, what can I do better today? How can I be a better version of myself than I was yesterday? And if you do that, you're a chassid of mine." So it's not about the strimal. It's not about the herring and the kugel. It's not about saying, the sar, the ta. It's about working on yourself in order to be the best Eved Hashem, servant of God, that you can possibly be. And while many, many, many disagree with my politics, many disagree with my approach, many just don't like me, which isn't nice, but okay. What I will say is I hope above all that I can represent the Jewish people to some extent in a favorable way. And I remember I was at the Ohel, the resting place of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, on October 7th. We accompanied President Trump. And as we were waiting, it was me, it was Ben Shapiro, it was the family of Idan Alexander, who's one of the American hostages still being held by Hamas, an Auschwitz survivor. And as we're waiting, Rabbi Yehuda Krinsky comes. Rabbi Yehuda Krinsky, of course, is the patriarch of the Chabad movement today, the last living of his generation. And he comes up to me, and I don't remember exactly how the conversation started, but it basically ends with him patting me on the back and sort of winking and saying, "And you're making a Kiddush Hashem," and then, walking away. And that to me was the best compliment I have ever received in the 2 years I've been doing this. And I go to a lot of dinners, and I, make speeches, and I always get these nice fancy introductions, and they're not well deserved, but whatever. But I can assure you that none of them have come close to the 10-second conversation when Rabbi Yehuda Krinsky said, "You're making a Kiddush Hashem," slapped me on the back, and then walked away.
I think that's instructive to go back to the students to make a Kiddush Hashem. Kiddush Hashem means that you represent Judaism, true Yiddishkeit, true Judaism, in a way that people look at it and say, like, "Wow, the Jews are something special. This is unique. This is great. This is you're not fighting, you're not screaming. You're being very thoughtful and representing it in a very intelligent way." And I think that's what I've been telling the Jewish students, that the wake-up call to the Jewish students is to be more Jewish. Just be more Jewish. Be who you are. And when you walk into a classroom and there's 15 or 20 Jewish students and they don't know that each other are Jewish, the professor doesn't know it, it gives them the ability to talk about them. If you have, let's say, black students in your class, right? They're there. A professor's going to be careful what he says about black people because they're sitting there. It could be any group. It could be Asians. It could be anything in the world. It could be French or English people. He's going to have a certain sensitivity towards them. If there's 20 students sitting in a classroom of 150 students and wearing yarmulkes, like, okay, what are you saying about the Jews? You're talking about people sitting in front of you. It's not some idea, some concept that's not relevant. It's right in front of you. So that's the Kiddush Hashem, yeah. And I feel bad for you you have my sympathy for the tough year that you had, but in the greater picture of Jews that have gone on Kiddush Hashem, you still had a comfortable home to go to, or a room to sleep in, and you had food, and coming, having been to Europe in the Holocaust, think about Kiddush Hashem. It's a word that we use in different applications and different circumstances, but yeah, the Kiddush Hashem is that every one of us could be making a Kiddush Hashem. Us talking right now is a Kiddush Hashem because this thing will get out there and someone will see it. And it's like, wow, the Jews, they're intelligent, they're interesting, they're making a point, they're proud to who they are. And this is a Kiddush Hashem. And I think every time a Jew walks out on the street wearing a yarmulke, that's a Kiddush Hashem. I've told this before. I'm walking into supermarkets, in the past year, and people are coming over to me and telling, God bless the Jews. I'm like, who are you? Why are you talking to me? Who am I? And we can't disconnect from what's going on in Israel. We are really one big nation, and every Jew that stands up and is proud to be Jewish and represents it in a proud way. Yes, amazing Kiddush Hashem.
Thank you.
I agree with Rabbi Krinsky.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Rabbi, I don't know if you have anything else, but I've certainly enjoyed the last, almost 40 minutes of talking here. I don't know, Rabbi, do you have any other burning questions here?
Shabbos, he told me that you talk very fast. So, the 40 minutes is more like an hour. Normally, when you listen to something, I always wondered why in the speed thing they have slowing it down. Everyone wants to hear, an hour lecture, you want to hear in a half an hour. And when you listen to it, it sounds like very normal. Now I know what the slowdown is for this Pos-cast.
Look, I always say we young people, we got places to go to, we got things to see. So, we're always moving. But I also think, and this is true, we watch things on double speed naturally now, lots of young people. So I think we've sort of just naturally adopted that way of speaking. So to us, it doesn't even sound fast. It sort of just sounds regular speed. And when people talk regular speed, it's sort of, they're slower on purpose.
All right. So what are you doing now? You're out of school?
I do speaking engagements full time. I do podcasts, and we will see what the future holds. I don't want to speculate, but
Right.
I'm very excited about the next 4 years, about our new administration. I will be in DC for the inauguration. I actually have to pick up the tickets in DC, so don't let me forget. And I'm very optimistic about the future of our country and the future of the Jewish people.
So, I think also, what you said, you never expected this to happen to you. And that's just like, Hashem runs the world. It's amazing. You were there. Like, yeah, I agree with the rest of the people totally, you're nuts for going to Harvard. But now you see like, wow, this is, you don't look back, you look forward. This was exactly what Hashem wanted, and you're doing amazing stuff. And kol hakavod, it's fantastic. Baruch Hashem. And this is, and what you said is right. Everybody's got to do their thing, and you can't really dictate to somebody. There's another guy who dropped out of Harvard who became pretty famous, and he also didn't expect that to happen. And now he's like affecting the entire world. Whether he's doing a good job or not is for a different Pos-cast. But I'm just saying that things, you get into a position, and once you're there, what do you do with it? And what you've done is an example for everybody else. We're not telling you that there's only one you. Hashem doesn't need more than one. But everybody has their place and their mission. And if you're in a situation, think like, what can I do about it? You can and you must do something to the best of your ability. Okay.
Amen. Well, it was a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Seth, when the guest starts yawning, it's time to cut it.
So thank you very much to Shabbos Kestenbaum for joining us. And thank you to all of you for listening to episode 91 of the Pos-cast. Rabbi Shmuel Posner. We'll see you next week.